The morning started like any other Tuesday for Jessica. She woke up late, spilled coffee on her favorite shirt, and had to rush out the door with her hair still half wet. The presentation she'd been working on for 3 weeks was sitting in her bag, and her boss expected her at the office in exactly 40 minutes. The subway was her only hope of making it on time. The station was packed with people. Everyone seemed to be in the same hurry she was, pushing and moving like a river of bodies flowing toward the platform. Jessica squeezed through the crowd, her heart racing as she heard the train approaching. She couldn't miss this one. Missing it would mean being late, and being late would mean disappointing her entire team. The train doors opened, and people rushed in like a wave. Jessica moved with them, her hand shooting out instinctively to grab the nearest pole for balance. The train was so crowded that standing steady without holding something was nearly impossible. Her fingers wrapped around the cold metal just as the doors began to close. But she wasn't alone. Another hand landed on top of hers at the exact same moment. Not beside it, not near it, but right on top of it. The touch was warm and unexpected, completely different from the cold pole beneath. Jessica's first instinct was to pull away and apologize, but something made her pause. She looked up to see who the hand belonged to. A man stood there, looking just as surprised as she felt. He had kind eyes and a slightly embarrassed expression, like he wanted to say sorry but couldn't find the words. Their eyes met for just a second, maybe 2, and in that brief moment, something strange happened. Neither of them moved their hand. The train lurched forward and they both held on, their hands still touching on that pole. Jessica felt her cheeks getting warm. This was awkward, right? She should move her hand, she should find another spot to hold, but the train was too crowded and honestly she didn't really want to move. There was something comforting about that touch, something that made the chaotic morning feel a little less overwhelming. The man seemed to feel the same way. He adjusted his grip slightly but didn't pull away. Instead, he gave her a small, apologetic smile that seemed to say he knew this was weird, but maybe it was okay weird. Jessica found herself smiling back before she could stop herself. They stood like that for 1 stop, then 2, then 3. The train rocked back and forth. People got on and off, but their hands stayed exactly where they were. Jessica became aware of every small movement, every tiny shift of his fingers, the warmth of his palm against the back of her hand. It felt personal in a way that made no sense for 2 strangers on a morning commute. Around them, the world continued as normal. A woman talked loudly on her phone about her weekend plans. A teenager listened to music so loud that everyone could hear it. An older man read his newspaper, folded into a tiny square so it would fit in the crowded space. But Jessica barely noticed any of it. Her entire focus had narrowed down to that single point of connection, that place where her hand met his. When her stop finally came, Jessica felt a strange reluctance to let go. She glanced at the man one more time, and he was looking back at her with the same uncertain expression. She pulled her hand away slowly, almost carefully, and moved toward the doors. As she stepped onto the platform, she couldn't resist looking back through the window. He was still standing there, still holding that same pole, and he was watching her go. The doors closed and the train pulled away. Jessica stood on the platform for a moment longer than necessary, watching it disappear into the tunnel. Her hand still felt warm where his had touched it. She shook her head, trying to clear the strange feeling that had settled over her. It was just a random moment, a coincidence, nothing more. She had a presentation to give and a job to focus on. But as she walked up the stairs and out into the morning sunlight, Jessica realized something that made her pause. For the first time in months, maybe years, she actually felt something. That simple touch from a stranger had woken up a part of her that she'd forgotten existed. It was like her heart had been asleep and someone had just knocked on the door. She went to work, gave her presentation, answered questions from her boss. But through it all, Her mind kept drifting back to that moment on the train. She kept thinking about his eyes, his smile, the way he hadn't pulled away even though he easily could have. What were the chances she'd ever see him again in a city of millions? Probably zero. But that evening, as she headed back to the station, Jessica found herself hoping. Just a little bit. Just enough to make her heart beat a little faster as she walked down those same stairs and waited for the train to arrive. The next morning, Jessica told herself she wasn't planning anything. She just happened to leave at the same time as yesterday. She just happened to take the same route. And when she got on the train, she just happened to move toward that same pole. It meant nothing. She was being ridiculous. Except he was there, standing in almost the exact same spot, like he'd been waiting. Their eyes met across the crowded car, and recognition flashed between them instantly. Jessica felt her stomach do a strange flip. He looked just as surprised to see her, but also, maybe, a little bit pleased. She moved through the crowd, and this time there was no accident about it. She reached for the pole deliberately, and so did he. Their hands met again, and this time it felt like a choice rather than chance. Neither of them said a word. But Jessica felt like they'd just had an entire conversation without speaking. "Hello again. I was hoping I'd see you." "Me too." This became their routine. Every morning for the next 2 weeks, they met at the same train, at the same pole, with their hands touching in that same quiet way. They never spoke, never exchanged names, but somehow they developed a language all their own. Small gestures that meant more than words. On the third day, Jessica noticed his hand was tense, his grip tight on the pole. Without thinking, she tapped the back of his hand twice with her finger, a gentle reminder to breathe, to relax. He looked at her with grateful eyes, and his grip loosened a little. The next day, when Jessica arrived, stressed about a deadline, he did the same thing back to her. 2 taps. It'll be okay. By the end of the first week, other commuters started noticing them. An older woman smiled knowingly as she watched their hands meet. A businessman gave them an approving nod. They'd become a fixture of the morning routine, the couple who held hands without really holding hands, who connected without speaking. Jessica started thinking about him during the day. She wondered what his name was, what he did for work, whether he had a dog or a cat or neither. She wondered if he drank his coffee black or with cream, if he was a morning person who actually enjoyed these early hours, or someone like her who hit snooze 3 times before finally getting up. On Monday of the second week, she did something bold. She stopped at the coffee shop before the train and bought 2 cups, both with cream and a little sugar, just the way she liked it. When she got on the train and their hands met, she held out the second cup to him with her free hand. He looked surprised, then touched, then accepted it with a smile that made her entire morning brighter. He mouthed the words, "Thank you," and took a sip, and from his expression, she could tell he liked it. The next morning, he did the same thing for her. Coffee, already waiting, prepared exactly the way she'd made his. They stood there drinking their coffee with one hand while their other hand stayed connected on that pole. It felt domestic somehow, comfortable, like they'd been doing this for years instead of days. When it rained one Wednesday, Jessica almost missed the train. She ran through the station with her coat over her head, her shoes soaking wet, and barely made it through the doors before they closed. She was breathless and dripping water everywhere, and when she looked up, she saw genuine relief on his face. He'd been worried about her. That realization made her heart swell. He shifted to make more room for her, and this time, when they reached for the pole, he wrapped his hand over hers instead of beside it. It was protective, warm, and more intimate than anything they'd done before. Jessica felt like she might cry from the sweetness of it. His thumb brushed across her knuckles once, twice, and she knew he was checking to make sure she was really okay. That evening, Jessica called her best friend Rachel and told her everything. Rachel listened and then declared this the most romantic and bizarre thing she'd ever heard. She insisted Jessica needed to actually talk to him, to get his number, to turn this into something real. But Jessica felt paralyzed by the fear that speaking might ruin everything. What if the magic only existed in the silence? What if real words couldn't live up to the conversation their hands were having? Still, as the days continued, Jessica found herself wanting more. The morning moments were beautiful, but they weren't enough. She wanted to know his voice, his story, his laugh. She wanted to tell him about her life, her dreams, her terrible habit of watching cooking shows even though she never cooked anything from them. The silence that had felt so special was starting to feel like a limitation. On Friday, she made a decision. She wrote a note on a small piece of paper during her lunch break. Just her name and a simple message. She'd leave it at the station, tucked somewhere near their usual spot where he might find it. It was scary and vulnerable and might lead to nothing, but at least she'd have tried. The weekend arrived and Jessica felt restless. 2 days without seeing him felt longer than it should. She kept looking at her phone, at the note she'd written but hadn't yet left at the station. Saturday dragged by slowly. Sunday felt endless. By Monday morning, she'd made up her mind. She'd leave the note today, whatever happened next. But Monday brought news that changed everything. Track maintenance, the sign read. This line closed for 1 week for repairs. Jessica stood there staring at the notice, feeling her heart sink. 1 week, 7 days without their morning ritual. 7 days without seeing him. She hadn't even known his name, and now she might never know it. The alternative route she had to take felt all wrong. Different train, different time, different people. Jessica went through the motions of her commute, but her mind stayed stuck on that closed platform. She kept the note in her pocket, her fingers touching it throughout the day like a talisman. Tuesday was harder. Wednesday was worse. By Thursday, Jessica realized how much those morning moments had meant to her. They'd become the best part of her day, the thing that made waking up early worthwhile. Without them, her mornings felt empty and gray. She caught herself looking for him everywhere. In coffee shops, on street corners, in the elevator at her office building. Ridiculous, she knew, but she couldn't help it. Friday evening, Jessica made a choice that felt slightly crazy. She went to the closed station, even though she knew it would be empty. She just wanted to be in the space where they'd met, where their hands had first touched. Maybe it would help her accept that this strange connection was over before it really began. She walked down the familiar stairs and onto the deserted platform. No trains, no crowds, no noise except her own footsteps echoing in the empty space. She moved to their spot, to that pole where everything had started, and placed her hand on it one last time. The metal felt cold without his hand there, too. "I thought I might find you here." Jessica spun around so fast she almost lost her balance. He was there, standing at the other end of the platform, looking as surprised to see her as she felt seeing him. They stared at each other for what felt like forever. Without the crowd, without the excuse of the train, the moment felt bigger and scarier and more real. He walked toward her slowly, and she noticed he was holding something, a small piece of paper, her note, the one she'd tucked near their usual spot on Monday before the closure. He'd found it, he'd kept it, and he'd come back here hoping she might do the same. They stopped a few feet apart, suddenly shy in a way they'd never been when their hands were touching. Jessica's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I'm Daniel," he said finally, his voice softer than she'd imagined. "And I've been trying to figure out how to ask your name for 2 weeks without messing everything up." Jessica felt laughter bubble up through her nervousness. "I'm Jessica, and I thought talking might break whatever this was." "Was?" he asked, and she heard the concern in his voice. "Is," she corrected quickly. "Whatever this is." They smiled at each other, and suddenly the awkwardness melted away. They started walking together without planning to, leaving the empty platform and heading up into the evening air. And then they started talking. Really talking. Words that had been building up for 2 weeks came spilling out. They discovered they worked only 3 blocks apart. They both grew up in small towns and moved to the city for college. They both took their coffee the same way, which they already knew, but it felt good to say it out loud. Daniel told her he was an architect who specialized in redesigning old buildings. Jessica told him she was a graphic designer who mostly worked on advertising campaigns. He admitted he'd been terrible at art in school. She confessed she couldn't draw a straight line without a ruler. They laughed about it. Easy and comfortable. The conversation flowed like a river that had been dammed up too long. They talked about their families, their jobs, their favorite foods, their worst dating disasters. Daniel told her about the time he accidentally went to a costume party in regular clothes. Jessica shared her story about showing up to a formal event in jeans because she'd read the invitation wrong. They found they could make each other laugh. Really laugh, the kind that made your stomach hurt. Hours passed without them noticing. The sun set and the streetlights came on. They walked through parks and past restaurants and down streets neither of them had explored before. At some point, their hands found each other naturally, fingers interlacing like they'd been doing it for years instead of just starting. "I was scared to talk to you," Daniel admitted as they sat on a bench watching the city lights. The hand thing felt so perfect. I didn't want to ruin it by being awkward or boring. "You're not boring," Jessica said firmly. "You're wonderful." He looked at her with such warmth that she felt it all the way through. "So are you. And this talking, getting to know you for real, it's even better than I imagined." Jessica leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling brave and happy and hopeful. The hand thing was special, but this is real, and real might be even better. They sat there for a while longer, just being together, before Daniel finally walked her home. At her door, they stood facing each other, neither wanting the evening to end. "Same time Monday?" he asked. "When the train reopens?" Jessica shook her head. "How about tomorrow? I don't want to wait." His smile could have lit up the entire city. Dating Daniel was everything Jessica hoped for, and more complicated than she expected. After that first evening, they started seeing each other properly. Coffee dates before work, long dinners after, weekend mornings at the farmer's market. Everything felt natural and right when they were together. They still met at their pole every morning when the train reopened. But now they held hands on purpose and talked about their plans for the day. Other commuters seemed delighted to see their silent ritual had turned into something more. The older woman who'd smiled at them before actually congratulated them one morning. "I knew it," she said with a knowing nod. "I told my husband about you two." But as weeks turned into months, reality started showing its complicated face. Jessica learned that Daniel had ended a serious relationship just 8 months before they met. His ex had been his college girlfriend, someone he'd planned a future with, and when she'd suddenly called it off, it had broken something in him. He didn't talk about it much, but Jessica could see the shadow it cast. Sometimes he pulled away when conversations got too deep, when Jessica wanted to talk about future plans or where things were heading. Daniel discovered that Jessica had her own walls. She'd been hurt before, too, by someone who'd made her feel like she was never quite enough. That relationship had ended 3 years ago, but it left her struggling with trust. She had trouble sharing her real feelings, often making jokes when things got serious or changing the subject when she felt vulnerable. Their first real argument happened on a Thursday evening. Daniel had made plans for them to attend his colleague's dinner party without asking if Jessica was free. He'd just assumed she'd want to come, that they'd go together. When he mentioned it casually, she felt her temper flare. "You can't just make plans for me," she said, trying to keep her voice level. "I have my own life, my own schedule." Daniel looked confused. "I thought you'd want to come. We're together, aren't we? I figured we did these things together." "We are together. But that doesn't mean you get to decide everything," Jessica shot back. You need to ask me, not tell me. I didn't realize it was such a big deal, Daniel said, his voice getting defensive. My ex and I always just went to things together. We didn't have to check every single plan. The mention of his ex stung more than it should have. Well, I'm not her, Jessica said coldly. Maybe you should remember that. Daniel went quiet, his expression closing off in that way Jessica had learned to recognize. Maybe I should go, he said finally. I'll see you tomorrow. He left, and Jessica immediately regretted how she'd handled it. But she was too proud to call him back, too scared to admit she'd overreacted. They didn't talk that night or the next morning. When Friday evening came and her phone stayed silent, Jessica felt panic starting to creep in. Was this it? Was this how they ended? Saturday morning, she stood on their platform, even though she knew he wouldn't be there. It wasn't a work day and there was no reason for him to come. But she needed to be in the place where it all started. She put her hand on their pole and felt the cold metal and the absence of his warmth and realized something important. The magic hadn't been in the mystery. The magic had been in the reaching for each other, in those small gestures of comfort, in showing up every day, in choosing connection even when it would have been easier not to. They were still doing that, just with words now, with real vulnerability. It was messier and harder, but it was also more honest. She texted him to meet her at the station. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later looking uncertain and worried. Jessica didn't waste time with small talk. Put your hand here, she said, placing her palm on the pole. He looked confused, but did it anyway, his hand covering hers just like that first day. That morning when we met, I felt something I couldn't explain. These past months I've been scared we were just caught up in some fantasy. But standing here now, I know the connection was real. I know it's real. I also know I messed up. I got defensive when I should have just talked to you. Daniel's fingers squeezed hers gently. I messed up too. I made assumptions I shouldn't have made. And I pulled away when I got scared instead of staying and working through it. He took a breath. My last relationship ended badly and it broke my trust in a lot of things. I've been protecting myself, keeping parts of me locked away. But that's not fair to you. You deserve all of me. Not just the easy parts. Jessica felt tears prickling her eyes. I've been doing the same thing. My ex made me feel like I wasn't enough. And I've been scared you'd eventually feel that way too. So I push you away before you can leave first. It's not fair, and it's not healthy. They stood there on the empty platform, hands connected, being more honest with each other than they'd ever been. A train came and went. Another one after that. They didn't move. I want to make this work, Daniel said finally. But it's going to take effort. Real effort. We have to actually talk when things get hard. I know, Jessica agreed. And I'm willing to do that. Are you? His answer was to pull her close and kiss her properly for the first time since their fight. 6 months after that moment on the platform, Jessica and Daniel had built something real and lasting. It wasn't always easy, and it definitely wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. They learned each other's patterns and triggers. Jessica learned that when Daniel got quiet, he needed space to process before he could talk. Daniel learned that when Jessica made jokes about serious things, it meant she was scared and needed reassurance. They still rode the morning train together, though now they lived together in a small apartment 3 stops down from where they'd first met. Their morning routine had expanded beyond just hand-holding. They took turns making coffee, arguing playfully about who made it better. They shared the bathroom mirror, getting ready in comfortable silence. They kissed goodbye before separating for their respective offices. But they never stopped reaching for that same pole when they rode the train. It had become their thing, their touchstone, the physical reminder of where they started. Some mornings, Jessica would look at their hands on that metal pole and feel overwhelmed by how much had changed since that first accidental touch. Their relationship wasn't the fantasy of those silent mornings. It was louder and messier. They had disagreements about whose turn it was to do dishes. They got frustrated when one of them forgot to buy milk. They had hard conversations about money and future plans and whether they wanted kids someday. But they had those conversations instead of avoiding them. They worked through disagreements instead of running from them. Daniel met Jessica's family and charmed her mother with his thoughtfulness. Jessica attended Daniel's work events and listened to him talk about buildings with genuine interest, even when she didn't understand all the technical parts. They built a life together piece by piece, choice by choice. On their kitchen wall, Daniel had framed something special. Jessica's note from the station, the one that had brought them back together, alongside a sketch he'd drawn of two hands meeting on a subway pole. Underneath, he'd written the date they first met. Jessica loved looking at it because it reminded her that good things could start in the most ordinary places. Their friends loved telling the story of how they met. At dinner parties, people would ask, and Jessica and Daniel would exchange smiles before launching into the tale. Some people thought it was impossibly romantic. Others found it slightly odd. But everyone agreed it was uniquely theirs. A year after that first touch, Daniel planned something special. He took Jessica back to their platform on a Saturday morning when it was relatively quiet. She didn't know what he had planned, but she trusted him enough now to just go along with it. They stood at their pole, their hands meeting in that familiar way. Daniel looked nervous, more nervous than she'd seen him in months. "Our hands met first," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Before we knew each other's names or anything about each other, our hands found each other. And they've kept finding each other every day since." He let go of the pole and pulled a small box from his pocket. Jessica's heart stopped beating for a second. "I want our hands to keep meeting every single morning for the rest of our lives," Daniel continued, opening the box to reveal a simple, beautiful ring. "Jessica, will you marry me?" Jessica couldn't speak at first. She looked at Daniel, at the ring, at their hands, at the pole that had started everything. 1,000 mornings flashed through her mind, the scared uncertainty of that first touch, the building anticipation of their silent routine, the fear when she thought she'd lost him, the work they'd both put in to build something real. "Yes," she said, and then louder, "Yes, absolutely yes." He slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her while a few other commuters on the platform burst into applause. Jessica laughed through happy tears, holding tight to the man who'd first reached for her on an ordinary Tuesday morning. They took the train together that day, not because they needed to go anywhere specific, but because it felt right. As the train rocked through tunnels and stations, they talked about their future, about the wedding they wanted to plan, simple and meaningful, about the home they'd build together, about all the mornings still to come. Life didn't become perfect after that. They still had hard days and tough conversations. They still disagreed about things and had to work through frustrations. But they faced it together, always reaching for each other the way they'd done on that very first day. Their wedding was small and personal, held in the spring with close family and friends. And yes, Daniel surprised everyone by including their subway pole in the ceremony. He'd gotten permission to borrow it temporarily, and they said their vows while holding on to opposite ends of it, their hands meeting in the middle just like they had 1,000 times before. Years later, when people asked them about the secret to their relationship, Jessica and Daniel would look at each other and smile. "We never stopped reaching for each other," Jessica would say. "Even when it was hard, even when we were scared, we kept choosing connection." And every morning, whether they were rushing for work or moving slowly on a weekend, whether they were happy or frustrated or just tired, their hands would meet. On a subway pole, across a table, in bed before sleep, their fingers would find each other. It was their language, their promise, their reminder that some of the best things in life start with a simple touch and the courage to hold on.